Chapter 4. When I'd gotten back to my old man's house that night, I'd found him sleeping in his chair. I'd tried waking him, but it had been no use. He'd snarl at me in between his snores and settled back into a deep sleep rhythm. He hadn't been sleeping, not a true restful sleep. He'd been passed out. But the way his head had fallen and his body was bent had looked damn uncomfortable. I couldn't leave him there like that, even knowing he'd probably spent many a night passed out in his chair. But that night would be different. He had me to take care of him. His big, strong son. Those familiar words had been the ones he'd used to describe me to any and all who would listen all my life, even when I'd been a bastard and he'd been a drunk SOB. I'd lifted him from the chair. He'd been disconcertingly light. It had been too easy to carry him up the stairs to his bed. Pulling down the covers with one hand, I'd laid him down. Undressing him, I'd removed his shoes, socks, and pants, leaving on his shirt. He'd been scrawny, skin and bones, with a distended stomach all out of proportion to the rest of him. All signs of him being the drunk I'd already known he was. Even so, having seen his condition worried me as I pulled the covers over him. It had been easy to forget that he was old now, not having seen him for 3 years. And in that moment, as I'd looked down at his sleeping face, resting peacefully in his bed, the snoring quiet, it had been easy to remember him as the father who drove me to hockey every Saturday and Sunday morning, up until Mom got too bad to be left alone. Sleep was fitful for me that night. I dreamed of Angela. And then I dreamed of the bloody face of the ref I'd punched and the immediate, horrifying regret. Regret still gripped me in the morning as I came down to the old disheveled kitchen. I heard a loud knock, and with my hair still wet from the shower, I opened the back door to find Angela standing there with a basket of muffins and a thermos of coffee. The sight and smell made me want to drop to my knees and promise myself to her forever. But I kept my cool out of habit. "There's a reason they call you Angel." "Yeah, it's part of my name. Let me inside before I freeze." She came inside the dingy kitchen and transformed the place, replacing the stale air with a scent of cinnamon and coffee, and whatever the hell that intoxicating perfume was that I knew as Angela. She looked as delicious as she smelled, but I didn't dare tell her that. I'd already gotten into enough trouble kissing her last night. She deserted me after the fight was over, and I was certain it had something to do with my out-of-control behavior. But damn if I could regret punching that bastard Tim. I wasn't sure if you were still talking to me after I ruined your party last night. Not exactly the impression I wanted to make on my homecoming. It's not your fault my ex-boyfriend is an ass. Glad he's your ex. I already been seeing him for a few years. It hasn't been good between us for a while. I don't know what I ever saw in him. She looked away and shook her head. No, that's not right. I should be truthful with you. I only saw him in the first place because I'd had my heart broken and needed someone, and there aren't a lot of young men to choose from around here. Why did you stay? She shrugged. I had a job and a home and family, and no one gave me a reason to leave. You could have, what, followed you to Toronto, to another country where I know no one and had no job? I remained silent because I knew she was right. I hadn't asked her to come with me, had made no promises, no commitment. And for the life of me, I couldn't think now of why the hell I'd left her behind when I'd wanted her so much. How the hell had that ever seemed like a good idea? Then it all came back when Mac Mackenzie walked into the kitchen. I hadn't been good enough for Angela. I had been no good, period. Not yet. I'd been too angry at the world, at my old man. The old man grunted at us and went back out of the room toward the bathroom. I'd needed to escape from my father, to leave the heartache of my life behind and start over fresh, create a new spotless reputation. I'd needed to become someone who deserved Angela. I was a fool. I wanted a clean slate. Thought I could leave my past behind if I didn't look back, make good. Come back someday for you, and I wasn't a self-destructive idiot. She'd haunted me in my dreams, right alongside my dead mother and my drunken live father. Nothing had changed. In spite of my intentions, I was still the same troubled troublemaker. I was a fool, too, she said. My heart hurt to see the pain in her eyes now. Maybe it's time to let the past go. I wasn't sure what she meant by that, whether it meant that she forgave me for past mistakes, or whether she was over me and what we'd had was in the past. My gut churned. I was afraid to ask. Instead, I said, I sent tickets. No one came to a game. She shrugged. No one has money to take time off and fly to Toronto for a hockey game. I nodded, scolding myself. I'd known that, had maybe even counted on it at the time, wanting to make an empty gesture to ease my guilt but not ready to face my past again. I had no idea what made me think I could face it this time. Inevitability? Christmas holidays. Maybe after 3 years I finally realized I couldn't undo my past by forgetting about it, by forgetting the people who'd helped me through it. Couldn't escape my ghosts by leaving because they'd followed right along with me. In the end, I couldn't let my old man go, wasting away until he was a corpse, without seeing him again. Mac had been a good man and a good father before Mom died, getting me started in hockey, driving me to practices and games, even after Mom got sick, back when we'd still had hope that she would get better. It had been a long and torturous fight. Had taken everything out of Dad, leaving nothing but a husk of a man when my mother was gone. I don't know why I stayed with Tim so long. Her words brought me back to the present. I studied her face. It was unchanged, simply beautiful. Creamy white skin and long dark lashes, framing dark eyes full of fun and innocence, hiding a depthless strength. She'd held me together on more than one night, covered for me too many times to count, shamed me into doing the schoolwork so I could qualify for the NCAA scholarship to the University of New Hampshire. Yeah, why'd you stay with that fucker? I couldn't help the anger. Force of habit. Sorry. No apologies for calling a spade a spade. I stayed... I don't know. She huffed a breath. Not a lot of choices. Did you know the average age in New Hampshire is 41 years old? I laughed, though I hated thinking of her looking for men to date and was glad she hadn't tried very hard to find someone worthwhile. Because one thing I was sure of was that if she'd really and truly put herself out there, men would have flogged. Maybe you stayed with Tim because he was a shield, so you didn't have to find someone real, so a real man wouldn't find you. I held my breath, hoping she'd admit to it. Oh yeah? You get a degree in psychology while you were off in the summers? No, but I did have a lot of time on my hands to think in the off-season. In truth, I'd seen a few shrinks, some at my team's insistence. I'd have to go back to one of them again now, a league condition to return from the suspension. She nodded. I bet. You never came home. That first summer I kept waiting for you to show up. I'd look out the window every time I heard a car in your driveway, but it was never you. When did you give up looking? I held my breath. We both knew I was asking when she'd given up on me. On us. She shrugged. Tough question. It was a long, slow process. My hope eroded in tiny pieces, like losing weight an ounce at a time, a little bit every day. I heard the pain in her voice and felt it in my belly, in my heart. I know. You know what? How that kind of loss feels. I didn't want to have to feel it again, but I did. She reached out, put her hand on mine. I looked at her delicate fingers, felt their softness and warmth, and clasped them like a Venus flytrap closing. She was the cure for my heartache at some elemental level. I'm sorry, Brady. I've always been sorry. I don't know how to make things better for you. Don't say that. She stood. I should go. Maybe you should talk to your dad. Jumping up from my chair, I felt panic closing in like I hadn't felt since I had been a kid. Don't go. It's Christmas Day, Brady. We have things to do at the house. You're invited for dinner, you and your dad. Mom's expecting you to get him to come over. Pride had me refusing to admit that I had no idea if I could handle my dad. I'd have to figure a way. I'll do it. What can I bring? Yourself. Wear an ugly Christmas sweater if you have one. An ugly Christmas sweater, eh? Eh? You going Canadian on us? I chuckled. I told you I've changed. Did you really? Not completely. I'm still the charmer you once fell for. For all the wrong reasons. You're really going to make me work for this, aren't you? Anything worth having, you're turning into your mother. That's the nicest compliment you've ever given me. I raised my brows. I'll have to work on that then. I love your mother, but not that way. She laughed and threw her hands in the air. I'm leaving now. She went to his back door and opened it, the way she'd done so many mornings, escaping from my house after spending the night to sneak back into her home before anyone in her house woke up. The wail in my chest of unbearable longing to feel that bliss again, of waking up with her next to me in bed, warm and loving and giving, almost brought me to my knees. What the hell had I done throwing that away? I'd been a foolish, angry kid. The question was, had I grown up enough to deserve her now? Or was I still a short-sighted troublemaker with a chip on my shoulder and something to prove to the unjust universe? She glanced back at me, as if she'd heard my thoughts and aimed those soul-melting eyes of hers at me. "I've missed you terribly," she said. "I'm looking forward to spending some time with you." Then she disappeared out the door.